Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar that we're going to be talking SMS pumping fraud. Going to be talking about some of the fraud losses that businesses are seeing and a new way to really effectively prevent this type of attack. My name is Lizzie Clitheroe. I'm the moderator for the session, and we are excited to have both David and Dennis for this as our speakers. Dave, would you like to do a quick intro, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm one of the co-founders here at IPQS, along with Dennis, and I currently serve as a CTO, so oversee a lot of our product and data.
I'm Dennis Weiss, CEO of IPQS, also here with my fellow David Mackler, our co-founder, and looking forward to hopping into SMS pumping.
Awesome. So SMS pumping, what we're going to be talking about today, I think it's a really interesting example of an attack where businesses have put a security measure in place, and this has been flipped on its head, and people are using it to attack said businesses. So for years now, businesses have used SMS one-time passwords to authenticate good users, but now this is being hijacked at scale to great fraud losses. And what's happening here is, I think we'll all be quite familiar with the flow. You sign up to something new, they ask for your phone number, they send you a little code, you put it in just to check it's you, it's your device. And this is being barraged by bots. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the consequences for businesses are. But Dennis, would love to hear from you on, why are we talking about this now? Why has it become such a high priority conversation with the enterprise customers that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, the quickest answer is that more and more companies are being hit by this type of attack, and a lot of them don't even know that it was going on. Usually they'll get a high SMS bill and they'll be like, oh, what is this? What's going on here? And the standard defenses that are out there are definitely falling short. And we're just having a lot of customers ask us about it. And we thought it was important to bring it to everyone and tell them how we fight it, how our customers fight it, and what success we're having with these measures that we're taking.
Yeah. Because as you say, some of the losses around this type of fraud can be fairly staggering. There's a stat here, it's a few years old now, so probably add a bit to this number, but we're talking around losses, annual global losses of $6.7 billion. And what we're dealing with here is a lot of SMS traffic in high risk markets are causing this disruption and causing this level of fraud losses. And as a result, some enterprises are even actually backing off from using SMSs as their way to authenticate. So there's implications about how people are authenticated, or even the types of geos that people are willing to do business securely in. And Dave, what sort of businesses are typically targeted for SMS pumping fraud? Do you see a commonality, one type of business, or should every company out there be checking whether they're vulnerable?
No, absolutely. Good question. I mean, really, we're seeing it more at the enterprise level at scale. And really any company that has some kind of identity flow, so either password reset or account opening where that, OTP process is being triggered. So really can affect everything. I mean, we have partners in travel, dating, finance, really all over the place that are being affected by this. And of course, a lot of the larger platforms, social media platforms, or any kind of like public forum are really more targeted at the moment. So it's really, the whole industry is pretty vulnerable from what we've seen.
Yeah. And I think it did hit the news a couple of years ago when Twitter admitted the scale of losses that they were dealing with. And other times that it's hit the news is a report talking about the fact that 5% of application to person or A2P SMSs were fraudulent. And the scale of this fraud is actually causing this decline in A2P SMSs being even sent. So Dennis, you said that businesses are kind of waking up to this, maybe a little bit late. How are you finding the awareness of this problem?
Yeah, I mean, often businesses, what I'm noticing is it's already too late. They've already got a big bill or something along those lines. I had a customer the other day reaching out to me and being like, hey, can you check out my phone bill? It was 400,000 pounds. And that's no small number, right? So we looked into it and we quickly discovered this was a cause for SMS pumping. We're seeing a lot of different countries being a part of it, ones that you usually don't look at, like bills coming from or charges from like Vietnam, Indonesia, Egypt, Philippines, kind of you name it, where you're not really looking, it's kind of happening. But honestly, more awareness is kind of the key fact that we need to focus in on here. And that's, again, why we're here right now. But even a small portion of malicious traffic can lead to huge losses.
That small proportion, like under 5%, can actually really spiral and cause some pretty major damage for businesses. David, love to hear a little bit more about like how this actually works. How does this play? Like, how do you understand these attacks to be deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll share what we've seen in the industry, and we'd love to hear more about what some of the other attendees have seen as well and some of the attack profiles. But yeah, I mean, typically it starts with a fraudster that's, motivated to earn money. So typically they're getting a percentage of the revenue generated on the OTP and SMS sending costs here. So they're very motivated on their side.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, they're going to use a variety of tools. Sometimes they're using actual SIM farms, so they may have a whole network of phones and SIM cards at their disposal. And sometimes they're using that to set up like their own mobile virtual number operator, an MVNO. Other times they're working on behalf of an MVNO, and that's usually under like a major telecom provider within that country. And so, they're getting, that MVNO is getting money for how much SMS traffic is pumped through their network. And so they'll kind of employ some of these fraudsters in a revenue share model and give them a percentage of the money that they're bringing in, essentially. But the way they're doing it, in addition to the SIM farms, they're looking for some kind of identity flow with an OTP trigger. So, either a login attempt, password recovery, maybe it's just account creation. But behind the scenes, they're using other tools to do this at scale. So they're going to be using emulators and virtual devices, to kind of look like a new user every time they're coming back to the website. They're going to be using residential proxies and mobile proxies to blend in as human traffic. So they have a lot of tools at their disposal that they're going to use to automate this process. And that way they can kind of trigger these attacks whenever they'd like. Usually they're kind of doing it over like a 1 to a few hour period. And just initially they're trying to blend in as human traffic, but eventually that volume is increasing so much that, it's pretty evident when these attacks are happening.
Yeah, and I think it's, with our kind of fraud prevention, bot detection hats on, I think it's quite easy to get your head around how all the SMSs are triggered. And what's really interesting about this type of fraud is like, how does that money circle happen? How does that money go from these telcos, and is it like rogue employees, or do they think they're dealing with legit people, or do you think they knowingly do fraud, or could it be a bit of a wild west and we're not really quite sure what's going on there?
Right, absolutely. I mean, sometimes the telecom carriers even know that this is going on, and we'll talk about this a little more through the presentation, but this type of abuse really only happens in certain countries. We're talking about Africa, Asia, kind of more like tier 3 countries that are out there that are not super regulated. And I see we actually got one Q&A already about regulation. So not to get ahead of ourselves too much there, but in the countries where this is happening, there really isn't much regulation. So the telecom carriers can kind of operate without any retribution from the government. So they're kind of somewhat a willing party in a lot of this abuse, and there's really just not much that can be done other than mitigating it, kind of ahead of that OTP being sent out.
So it could be willing parties or turning blind eye, or some kind of mix of the above.
Yep.
So Dennis mentioned some unexpected losses of 400 grand just coming out of the blue, and let's talk through that. Let's talk how you actually get to numbers like that. So in some high risk or high cost countries where there's high delivery fees to send these SMSs, you can be looking as high as 24 cents per SMS. So a fraudster deploys, one bot, triggers 10,000 OTP requests, and you're looking at a bill of 2.5 grand. And they're looking at it and they're like, cool, we're getting past their bot defenses. It's triggering the OTPs as we want. Let's turn the dial up a little bit. And quite easily you're looking at 100,000 SMSs, 24K. And over a few hours or even a week, that can be dialed up again, triggering 1 million SMSs, 240K. And so within a month, you can even be looking at losses of 1 million because of, what looks to your IT department as a bit of a spike in traffic can actually cause this real financial drain. And Dennis, from your conversations with customers, is that 400 grand that you mentioned, is that typical? Do you find that these companies are dealing with some big losses here?
It's huge losses. I mean, I've heard the number I shared earlier. We actually had a new customer that's onboarding with our new SMS pumping tools that, just has $5,000 that they noticed, but we show them how quickly that can exponentially increase, and they're getting ahead of it proactively. And that's really when we want to get in front of it. We don't want to be, after the fact, even though we can figure it out. I had another customer that actually told me that we saved them $6 million. So you could call me the $6 million man today, but it was $6 million that they stated that we saved them because of what we were able to implement. And it goes back to, stopping the bots, using phone reputation and looking at that and stopping it before all this can happen.
That's pretty good ROI on the IPQS tool. You're just saving $6 million. So there's the report out last year from Mobile Squared that's really interesting. It's quite a data-driven report, and it was looking at some of the dynamics around this topic. And you can see here there's a bit of a heat map of the global risk. And it's, I think Dennis and Dave have both alluded to this, that it could be quite specific to different regions and different countries. As you see, the ones in green are fairly low risk. There's yellow, amber, up to red, the very high risk countries that tend to be high. They can charge high amounts to send an SMS, and there's also a great deal of fraud connected to these. And this report found that the number of high and medium risk markets had more than doubled in just 6 months. So it was going from quite a niche topic just happening, this fraud was set up in certain countries, and it's kind of expanding more and more that you're having to deal with this as you are dealing with a global customer base. So regions with rising fraud risk: Middle East, Caribbean, Africa, Asia. And as a result of this high risk traffic, the global SMS traffic in general had actually dropped 9% in 2023 compared to projections. And that was really very highly connected to the high delivery fees and fraud risk. And even if that is only 5% of that traffic that is got high fees, it can cause really, really significant disruption. And another point that the report talked about that I thought was interesting was around the impact of this around missed revenue. So if businesses are getting a bit spooked about dealing with customers securely in these particular regions, they might pull back from doing business with them, or they might stop offering certain products or certain services that do need that authentication. So it was, I think it's interesting to look at the data. And Dave, does this align with what you've seen on sort of the geos and the differing levels of risk from one area to another?
Absolutely. I mean, we've noticed it's a lot of the same countries where kind of the worst attacks are happening. I think, in those markets, you just have carriers that are a little bit more, and telco providers that are a little bit more favorable to these kinds of attacks. They're like more willing to support them. So it's typically a lot of the same players over and over that you'll see. But yeah, definitely something in line with what we're seeing. We're seeing people move over to, WhatsApp and Viber and kind of other sources, maybe in-app messaging as well, to do some confirmations. As that kind of SMS adoption is kind of dwindling a little bit due to some of these issues.
Yeah. And Dennis, when you've spoken to customers about this issue, are they talking about moving away from SMS, or is it really more focused about solving the problem?
Yeah, so we definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're good. I was just going to say really quickly. I mean, we do see people go to WhatsApp using push notifications, but what we found, it's better to actually solve the problem rather than just shifting over. What we're seeing like WhatsApp is that prices are increasing there. So it's like, is this solving the problem if it's costing you more to fight it? So again, solving the problem is obviously the best way to go about it. And using that multi-layer approach is really a key way to do it. But go ahead, David. I think you're going to add something there.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. I'd say it's a much easier problem to solve it than spend the engineering resources to kind of, shift how that authentication process is done. Whereas, implementing our solution could take, an hour as opposed to kind of ripping out, current APIs for SMS and putting in other options. And usually that's a little bit of a buggy process as well that needs to be tested quite a bit. So just solving it is a much easier issue. It's just that a lot of the solutions on the market haven't really been addressing it the right way from what we've seen.
Yeah, and also then you have to have the right apps on your device and all that stuff. So I think it does add complexity where we're just trying to be as frictionless as possible and go that route. So solve it, don't shift it.
Yeah, because pretty much anyone with a mobile phone has a phone number associated to it, but they're not necessarily a WhatsApp user. They're not necessarily want to download yet another app to their phone. So I think that's some great points there about focusing on really solving it, the issue. So talking a little bit about the attacker toolkit. So Dave alluded to this a little bit when we were talking through the actual flow of these attacks, but wanted to delve into a few of the things that make these attacks successful for fraudsters. First up is SIM farms. So how do SIM farms work? It's really when people set up, they've got multiple SIM cards inserted into special modems or gateways, or we have a lot more eSIMs now as well, which makes it a bit easier. And they're setting up automated scripts to send and receive messages or trigger calls. And the idea here really is all around fraudsters rotating SIMs and rotating numbers to avoid detection. They don't want to get on the block list, and so they're constantly trying to move the numbers and the SIM cards they're using. Dave, how does this work in practice in the SMS pumping fraud example? How is this helping augment the attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, the fraudsters have access to a huge amount of numbers from the, MVNO that they're going to be supporting, or if it's their own MVNO, then they do have these SIM farms and they kind of have, a number registered to each of these devices, often in the same area. And, they're powering, hundreds of devices basically from the same location. They don't always have to have that though. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, they could just have a very large list of numbers that were given to them by the telecom operator or the MVNO. So there's a lot of tools at their disposal, but essentially they're using all numbers that they don't ever have to complete the OTP process on. It doesn't, they're getting paid as soon as that SMS is triggered. So for them, they don't even care about, getting that message and like entering it back in. That's not needed here. But the way they're kind of triggering those SMS messages to go out, they're using pretty sophisticated bots. So again, kind of like we were talking about before, the virtualized devices, the emulators, exactly. So they're going to be, trying to blend in as human traffic. They're going to be rotating their IP addresses with residential and mobile proxies. If there is a CAPTCHA that pops up in the process, there are CAPTCHA solving APIs out there. So they're paying, maybe a $3 or so per like 1,000 completions. And so you can imagine they can do this at scale very affordably, right? So it could cost them, maybe like $20 to $50 for a huge attack with hundreds of thousands of CAPTCHA solving completions. And again, they typically have access to the proxy network for like a flat fee per month. And then in addition to that, they're using a virtualized device software out there that's going to let them look like a different device every time they're coming back to the identity flow or wherever they're triggering that OTP. So again, they can kind of emulate Android devices, iOS devices. They can look like a Windows device on Firefox and Chrome. So they just have so many tools at their disposal. A lot of platforms just really aren't picking up on that emulation, and that's really a telltale sign that this is going to be some kind of abuse. And it could be anything at that point. It could be account takeover. It could be just standard account creation fraud. But if there is an SMS flow involved, typically it's going to be SMS pumping.
Yeah, and I think the SIM farm and the anti-detect tools, there's really good examples, and even the CAPTCHA solving services, they're good examples of how we're not just dealing with like lone fraudsters anymore who are trying to make a buck. There's this entire infrastructure around these attacks, and that you've got services and tools and data and infrastructure. And Dennis, I'm sure this is something that comes up a lot when you're talking to customers about dealing with the maturity of this underground economy and all the tools that have been set up to launch attacks. So how is this playing out with customers, and how are they dealing with and keeping ahead?
Yeah, I mean, fraud as a service is a real thing. I mean, we're in a world of SaaS, but fast is a real thing. So it's definitely maturing. And I mean, you can go on GitHub, you can pull some tools that can help you do SMS pumping. It's very mature, but a dollar goes a long way in these different countries that seem to be big proponents of committing these kind of SMS pumps and attacks. So, I mean, a dollar goes a long way. It's maturing, and we're definitely seeing more and more targeted attacks as they get more sophisticated. So,
yeah, and it shows that everything we put into place, that so because you still see captures all over the internet, right? But there are these solver services, and you know, with the advent of Gen AI, it's easier for machines to kind of recognize images as well. So they don't really cut it anymore.
yeah, that's true. I mean, I think a caption nowadays, like Dave said, it's $3 for 1,000 solves. I think for customers, it just brings more friction, which is something we're trying to avoid. That's why we think our tools are better, because less friction, better experience. But also, you know, once a fraudster sees what your flow is, then they're going to build the automation around that. The way that we like to fight fraud is we do it frictionless, so that they don't even know that they're getting trapped or stopped. We kind of put them in this endless loop so that we can charge them money or cost them money. And that's when we notice that attacks go away, right? So if we can cost a fraudster to spend more money on infrastructure, bots, proxies, all that kind of stuff and automation, then they're going to slow down their attacks, and they're going to go look somewhere else to try to do the attacks and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they go after the, as long as you're not that lowest hanging fruit, then all good.
True.
And Dave, when we're talking about bots, this is slightly off topic, but I think it's interesting to touch on because of how much talk we're hearing in the industry about it. Hearing a lot about the rise of agentic commerce, and the fact that, you know, in the next few years we could, you know, it's not just about detecting bad bots. There could be very legitimate users already using agents to complete purchases and to log into their accounts and do their everyday activities. So what signals do we look at that can tell good automated traffic from malicious automated traffic?
Absolutely. Yep. That's something that we've been really focusing on as well, because we do see the AI adoption is, you know, continuing to increase. We're all about not blocking legitimate users. That's our main goal. And so we're also working to extend that to make sure that we're not blocking, you know, legitimate agentic requests. And there are some ways we're doing that now. Essentially, a lot of the agentic providers are kind of providing ways for us to identify their devices. And so, you know, it's something that we're taking into consideration when we're doing risk scoring. We may see that it's kind of like a virtualized device or an emulator, but we understand, okay, this is attributed to a legitimate provider. So we may look at it a little bit differently and may suppress certain tests that we're running. But I'd say most of the fraud that we're seeing now are from either malicious providers or people running their own, you know, LLMs and products on their own servers. So far, it's been very easy for us to separate the good from the bad. But it's something that we're keeping a close eye on as that space develops more.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how it could be contained commerce, online commerce on its head. So gotta keep dynamic. There's a question that's come in around device fingerprinting, and wouldn't this be a way to prevent some of this, which leads us on very nicely to our nice slide. So thank you, whoever asked that question. So in the context when we're dealing with fraudsters that have got anti-detect fraud tools, that they've got lots of ways to spoof devices, emulate devices, you know, Dave, this is a question for you, you know, how relevant is device fingerprinting still? Can we still do it confidently? And what exactly is IPQS doing around device fingerprinting to make sure that we can deal with emulators and spoof devices?
Yeah, absolutely. We still love device fingerprinting for solving this problem. It's definitely one of the best signals that you could have to supplement your scoring and kind of make that decision of if you should send the SMS OTP code. Basically, in this example, this is a T-Mobile address or T-Mobile IP address. So this is someone that's getting on a mobile proxy in the US. But what our device fingerprinting has uncovered here in the fraud score insights is we're actually seeing they're intentionally spoofing their device. So they're using some kind of virtualized software behind the scenes. But we're also seeing that they're not even in the US. And so we're seeing kind of a pretty far anomaly in their true location that would likely indicate, it's typically Eastern Europe or Asia, somewhere quite far away. And then on top of that, we're also seeing that a mobile emulator is being used here. So I'd say this is kind of like a very common risk profile to see during SMS pumping attacks. Typically, they will be on emulated mobile devices just to kind of blend in a little bit better. And then when they're using that mobile IP address, in this case, T-Mobile, it sort of defeats most IP intelligence products that are out there because mobile IPs are going to be shared by good and bad users. So if you just had the IP address here, it would be very difficult to make an accurate decision. Since we have the full device fingerprinting profile, it's very easy to say, okay, this is 100% a high risk event. Whether this was on login, it could also be account takeover based on this profile. So basically anything the user is going to do at this point is going to be bad. Just the amount of checks that we're seeing here in the fraud score insights, but also with emulation, you just don't see that for legitimate users. So it's a very high confidence signal to say, okay, this is definitely going to be a bad event, whether it's SMS pumping or account creation, even on a payment or chargeback, a potential chargeback would likely result here if this was during the checkout process.
Yeah, there's as you say, there's certain things that a fraudster will do to try and cover their tracks. That's just a major red flag that real users unlikely or never going to do it. So it's looking for those subtle signs of somebody not having particularly good intent. We've had a question come in from Matt, which actually leads us quite nicely onto our next slide. So with the rise of SIM farms driving SMS pumping at scale, what detection signals are most effective in distinguishing SIM farm generated traffic from legitimate high volume usage? And I think this leads us quite nicely to it's actually a new product from IPQS that there's a specific SMS pumping API that's been launched, and it's really around detecting phone numbers that are linked to SMS pumping and having targeted algorithms to be able to detect this activity. So Dave, could you talk us through this? And is this really how we do distinguish from that nasty SMS that could be coming from a SIM card or other bad intentioned traffic?
Right. Yeah. And Matt, thank you for the question. So, with the SIM farms and, just distinguishing from a legitimate high volume event, typically we're going to see greater diversity in the amount of carriers behind the scenes, maybe different countries. But if we're noticing that one country in particular is having very high volume, and then most of that is coming from a specific MVNO within that country, to us, that's a huge red flag from what we've seen. We've done a lot of testing before we released this product, and we were monitoring quite a lot of SMS volume daily. And so we're pretty confident now in how fine-tuned our algorithm has become, where we are looking at, anomalies in velocity. And so when we're seeing pretty large attacks happening for that specific MVNO, even under a major telecom provider in that country, just gives us a lot more confidence to say, okay, this is definitely attack. We understand there could be large scale events that are happening that could drive higher traffic, but again, we're just seeing more diversity in those signals where it's not all one MVNO driving that traffic, especially if they're already on our radar for being kind of suspicious and sketchy.
Interesting. And so is this product now live, or is it coming?
This is all live now, and I see we have another question about one member or attendee here is using our phone validation already, and they're asking if it's a separate product. This is more of an add-on. So this is a feature that if you already have our phone validation plugged in, that's great. There's just one additional setting that you would need to pass from your side, and that's it. And it would automatically start to display a new field that comes back in the API response, and it gives you some indicators of, are we seeing an SMS pumping attack? What is the risk of it? We're low, medium, or high. And then it has a recommended message as well if you should block the OTP request or not. So it's very simple, and you can add it on to your existing phone validation product if you're currently using that now.
Nice. Sounds great. And so we've touched on earlier in the webinar the global nature of this attack type, and sometimes businesses do find that challenging when they're trying to stamp down on types of fraud, like very far from where the HQ is and in different, very, very different regions. Dennis, could you talk to us a little bit about how this SMS pumping detection does scale globally with IPQS?
Yeah, I mean, we've noticed in the past that it's really hard to get out of North America and get data there. But since IPQS does have such a layered approach, and I mean, the best way I can explain it is you think about an onion, right? So a lot of our competition is kind of focused on that outer layer there, whereas IPQS, we're looking at every other layer. So even though we do phone validation, device fingerprinting, we also do IP reputation, phone validation, email verification, all that good stuff. We kind of look at it from the full picture. We have every layer, so it helps us understand traffic globally, right? Because we're seeing traffic from every single place in the world that you can think of. Maybe not Antarctica, but we're seeing it all over the place, and that just helps us be more fine-tuned. So we're also looking at technologies that, bots are being automated with, following that, tracking that. So when I talk about the onion, I mean, the only people in the end that cry are the fraudsters. But getting that data globally is really the key here, because a lot of companies were just lacking on that global coverage, which we were able to pierce through and get.
Yeah, it's very hard to get that global visibility into this and understanding the getting into the different telecoms and their MVNOs. And Dave, how could you talk to us a little bit more about how exactly we do get this intelligence at such a scale?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working with major telecom providers kind of all over the world, and then some of the aggregators as well. So some of the telecom backbone operators that facilitate calls and SMS routing, we're getting signals from them as well, right? So they are kind of facilitating the messages that are going in between the telecom providers. There's a lot of really good signals that we've been able to get from those partners, in addition to kind of working directly with some of the major telecom providers globally as well. So we're just soaking up data from pretty much everywhere we can get it, and then making the best decisions possible.
Yeah, and being able to roll this out so people can then hopefully accept with confidence that the customers in these different regions without worrying about this draining lots of money. So Dennis teed this point up really nicely, that when we're thinking about defenses, so we've talked about device fingerprinting, we've talked about looking at the phone number and assessing the risk of that phone number, but where this really sings is as part of a multi-layered strategy. Foundational needs to be looking at network and IP intelligence. Do we see any signs of proxies, bots, spoof devices, untrustworthy user credentials, looking at patterns of behavior and analytics. And then this is all underpinned by really good threat intelligence, where we're actually understanding what good traffic looks like, how it's evolving from one day to the next. And with that, it does, I think it's really worth focusing on the value of that fresh threat intelligence, and how important that is to any kind of fraud prevention, including this one. And Dennis, so how, we've heard a little bit from Dave about specifically around the SMS pumping fraud data, that in general, how does IPQS keep ahead of evolving attacks and keep focused on threat intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that we got to keep going, right? So all our tools are designed to capture more and more data. And that's really how we stay ahead of it. And as you know, I mean, fraudsters are always going to evolve and tweak what they're doing. So if they see like a CAPTCHA, they're going to tweak how the automation works, how it bypasses that and whatnot. So for us, I mean, we got to keep on top of the data, and that's really the key. I mean, we're going on the dark web. We have a team of researchers that are looking for the newest attack vectors and things of that nature. Also, our honeypot network that we built, as many of you probably already know, we own a coffee roastery, a distillery, we own a soccer club, we own all these different real brick and mortar businesses to understand what real traffic looks like. We're not just guessing on how to stop fraud, we're actively inviting fraudsters to attack our own companies that we own so that we can learn, right? We have open ways that they can do credit card testing, and we just learn from them that way, but we get a lot of data with that. And we could have a whole webinar on honeypots and the love that we have for that, but it's really helped us grow and see how fraud is attacking the world in real time. So, I mean, just being ahead of the game, always gathering new data, relying on our customer feedback, it's just been huge for us. And that's really how we keep getting better and better each and every day.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it does boil down to this point here at the bottom in the middle around that visibility into emerging attacks, that we're not just waiting for, oh, you know, this attack happened, let's try and stop that the next time. It's actually getting ahead of it and preventing that before we see any damage from it. So I would love to hear a little bit about, you know, how we're working with customers on this, any success. And so I think the interesting thing about SMS pumping, we've alluded to it, that the real success is when you don't have these big bills that come in a month or so, or however long it takes to get communicated back to the fraud department. But in the meantime, there are other KPIs to keep on top of and to monitor when you're rolling out a solution to try and stop this. Dave, what advice do you give to customers, and what success factors do you work with on customers when rolling out this kind of solution?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually seen some really good metrics so far, mainly around conversion rates, because if during these attacks, your conversion rate will typically crash, since you have so many numbers being generated or, you know, coming through to generate that SMS, but they're never completing the OTP in these attacks, or at least for the most part. So watching that conversion rate of your OTP process is a huge signal that you can use to kind of identify when these attacks are happening. And, you know, maybe going back and look at some of your records as well to maybe identify attacks that you didn't know were happening. So again, can kind of separate, more so to Matt's question before, separate those high volume events from, you know, actual attacks that are happening. So it just gives you a little bit better visibility into that. We've also seen, you know, if you're deploying our multi-dimensional, you know, suite of tools here, we've actually seen CAPTCHA requests are going way down. So you're saving a little bit of money there as well, because we're able to pre-filter so many bots and high-risk users that you just wouldn't even want to show a CAPTCHA to. It's also making the fraudsters' lives a little bit more difficult, because now, you know, they have other things that they have to get past in that flow to go ahead and, you know, log in as another user fraudulently or create that fraudulent account. So just giving the fraudsters, you know, more friction essentially. And then of course, you know, like Lizzie said, just watching the overall bill and that volume of SMS sent, especially for the higher risk countries, the countries that you know are more vulnerable. And then even watching, you know, look at your own metrics of how many active users do you have in those markets truly, right? There's some countries where you might get a lot of attacks, but you might have a very small amount of active users in those markets. So just something to keep an eye on as well.
To understand that baseline is when you can look at your traffic and be like, does this seem right, or does it look suspicious that you got, you know, if you've got a low number of customers expected, but you've got really mounting attack traffic, traffic in general.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to check the Q&A, last opportunities to get some questions in. So we've got a question in. How large can losses get for a company before they even realize they're being targeted? I mean, Dennis, you gave that staggering 6 million number. I assume they'd have noticed before they got to 6 million that they were having some losses. But are you looking at the thousands before people really notice that there's something amiss going on here? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's different, right? So I did mention that a customer reached out to us and they were only having like $5,000 in issues, but they knew that it was going to keep growing. So they wanted to proactively get ahead of it. So, I mean, it's really kind of what Dave just talked about here. Like you can notice different things happening, and that's where you can kind of already tell it's happening. But I recommend, if you do have a flow like this, to definitely check it out and make sure, you know, nothing's happening. And if so, it's very easy to stop it. That's the greatest thing about SMS pumping. It's very easy to stop it. So having something in place, even if you don't think it's hitting you, is not a bad idea, because the way that it's set up will actually warn you that it's starting to happen. So.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we had a market research client that actually shared an interesting story with us about a year ago, and they were on Twilio. They had their auto charge enabled. And overnight, they had a huge attack in a few random, tier 3 countries, let's call it. And they had a $300,000 bill the next morning, and nobody was watching it at the time. So they woke up to this huge bill. They were on the hook for it with their SMS provider since they had the auto bill enabled and everything else. So they didn't really get much wiggle room there, and that was a very expensive lesson for them to learn. And so, since then we've come in and helped them with that process. But it's not, you just want to be careful that you're not leaving yourself vulnerable to an event like that, where a huge attack can come in overnight while nobody's really monitoring the system.
Yeah, that's not something that you want to wake up to when you're checking your emails and you've got a casual 300K bill that's unexpected.
Yeah, it can skew some numbers. So
yeah. So wrap up time. So I think we've covered a lot here today, talking a bit about the attack types, like what are the toolkit that fraudsters use to actually deploy these attacks, and some of the really good strategies and solutions that people can use to better defend against this. So in summary, really key point is around real-time detection before send. You don't want to be worrying about it after the 300K bill. You want to be knowing that you've got the protections in place to prevent that from happening. Once the SMS has already been sent, the cost is already incurred. So you need real-time risk scoring. You need to validate SMS numbers before you send that out. Multi-layer defense, you'll hear this a lot from the IPQS team, how important this is, whatever kind of fraud you're dealing with. But as fantastic as the SMS pumping API is, no single data point is going to be a silver bullet. You do need to combine the phone, device, IP, behavioral insights. But I love the message from Dennis that it's very, very solvable. Sometimes in the fraud prevention industry, we can get a bit caught up with, oh, the attacks are getting so sophisticated. This is so hard. This is so difficult. This is a very solvable problem. And I really, really love that message. So that's something I think that we can all take away. And then the final point is around this adaptive intelligence to stay ahead. Make sure you've got you or your team, or you're working with vendors such as us that can really keep on top of what traffic is looking like, and being able to continuously learn and adapt. Dennis, if you had to give business leaders one key recommendation, or you can do more than one if you want, for reducing SMS fraud this year, what would it be?
I mean, for me, you kind of just covered it. It's always the multi-layer approach. So using our phone validation add-on and also device fingerprinting, surefire way to solve it. Obviously, fraud will evolve, but we evolve with it. And kind of just to close us out here, someone just texted me and asked if I was drinking a Modelo. I'm actually drinking water in a can.
It does look like
But but if anyone's going to be at Money 2020 or Authenticate and wants to grab a water or a Modelo with me, would love to talk to you about this in person. But we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and listening to us. And we'll clip this up and send these out on LinkedIn so you can follow up. But our doors are always open. And cheers to you. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.